right. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy 4th of July again. Everyone who owns a dog is not going to be happy tonight, but that's okay. Man, I've seen a lot of Facebook arguments over dogs and fireworks the last couple of days. Whew, first world problems. But hey, we're going to be setting off our own type of fireworks this morning, as Rachel alluded to, and that's I get the privilege and the honor to talk about lust, adultery, and divorce on the 4th of July. So is anyone excited? All right, some of you are really nervous. So in all seriousness, I do need to say this. This morning is going to be a really sensitive, nuanced, tough, messy conversation. And so one of the things I would ask of you is to extend me grace, knowing that it is impossible for me in less than 35 minutes to talk and hit on every particular kind of nuanced thing, especially within the topic of divorce. So I say that ahead of time in humility, knowing that it would take me a whole series to really kind of, with justice, parse all of this out. But at the same time, I don't want to shy away from this topic. And it just so happened that it lined up on the 4th of July. And I don't want to shy away from it because Jesus didn't shy away from it. Right? So one of our values here at the Bridge, our first value is that we're rooted in the Scriptures. And so we usually try to preach through a portion of Scripture. This whole summer, we're taking care of the Sermon on the Mount. And so we're going to dive front and center into this because that's what Jesus did. And we're just following him as messy and as broken as we are. And again, I'll give you one last opportunity, as Rachel said. If you have kids in here, we do have childcare behind me upstairs up through 5th grade. Without further ado, the most famous sermon in the history of the world is what we are in. So we're diving in Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 27. Matthew chapter 5. Starting at verse 27. If you need a Bible, we have these underneath your chairs. We're going to be on page 660. And here we go. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. And if that's not enough, Jesus then moves into divorce. Verse 31. It's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And thank you very much, Jesus. Maybe I'll need a raise after this. We'll see how this goes. Trust your feelings. Follow your heart. If it feels good, do it. Those are the mantras of our culture today. They would be the worship lyrics of the songs that our culture sings. Trust your feelings. Follow your heart. Mark, what's wrong with those? You're saying that kind of like tongue-in-cheek, a little sassy. What's wrong with like going with whatever your heart says? Of course, go with your gut. Of course, trust your feelings. If it feels good, do it. I could trace this out historically. I don't have time for it, but it's phrases and postures and a culture like that has led us to our current cultural moment, which is here's how I describe it. A casually permissive, relaxed, hookup sex culture where anything goes as long as it's legal, You're of age, usually 18, and it's mutually consensual. It's this notion that sex is casual, it's instinctual. And we'll come back to that. What's the big deal? I mean, Mark, porn's legal if you're over 18. So there's nothing wrong with hooking up. We have these natural sexual urges, so if it feels good, do it. The thing about human beings, and we know this, we are full of good and bad desires. And desires, it all comes down to what you do with your often instinctual desires, meaning this. We need to keep our desires in check. We need to, at times, contain our desires. We need to be held accountable because here's why. Not all desires, if acted upon, lead to good things. Let me give you a couple examples just so you can see that this principle here is actually, this is a human thing. It's not a sexual thing, although it certainly pertains to sex. 2 examples. One, we talked about this 2 weeks ago if you were here. I talked about anger, right? And so many times in life we have inside of us this anger, like we're this hatred that's just bubbling up, boiling within, and we have a couple options that we could do with that desire. And let me say, that desire could be totally justified, meaning you could be angry at someone or something that you should be angry at. So it's a totally good and normal desire. But if you take that anger, and let's say I go out, for example, and I physically hurt someone because I'm angry at them and I hate them because of an injustice that they did, or if I ruin and trespass someone's property because I'm angry at them, that is an example of a desire that hasn't been held accountable, contained, and held in check. Let me give you another one that maybe is a little bit more enjoyable. Sorry for doing this, but it's like eating. A double at In-N-Out. Here's my latest thing. I've been in the mood for this last month or two. They have a great happy hour, and this is not a paid promotion, but Lucille's, those apple butter biscuits. Woo! Anybody know what I'm talking about? Okay. I've ordered a couple of baskets of those, so this is going to apply to me. So right, you guys know me, Ruth Chris, medium rare, tenderly cut steak, right? You just put the knife in and it kind of automatically falls through. It's that juicy. Here's the deal. When you get those, you have, if you're like me, if you're a human, this craving, oh my gosh, this food is so good. I want it. I want more. Give me another basket of apple butter biscuits. That is totally normal. You are made with a craving and a desire for food. Why? Because God made food. He made it good, and you should be hungry. You need to eat to live. It's a totally normal and positive human desire. However, if you don't hold it in check, there's an accountability. What happens? That's what the word glutton means. I think we actually don't talk about gluttons enough. Because according to the scriptures, that is a sin. And the whole point is, if you eat too much and you become controlled by food instead of you controlling food, what happens then is what? Right? Diabetes, bad blood cholesterol, obesity, all this stuff. There are consequences to that if you allow that desire to control you rather than you holding it in check, and it is a totally natural, normal, God-given desire. So if we leave certain desires unchecked and we allow them to become bigger than us, controlling us, they can lead to unhealth, dysfunction, and decay. So it is with our over-sexualized and casual sex culture. That's probably my main point this morning. And here's one of the things I want to make clear, real clear, because I did not grow up this way. I grew up, and there's a whole thing called the purity culture, with this idea that Christians are like anti-sex, right? And so whenever we talk about it, it's like, Yeah, we're like pointing our fingers. I don't be careful where I point my fingers. I don't think I'm like pointing at any one of you. We're pointing our fingers. We're judgy. Like we're more judgy about sexual sins than we are, I would say, social sins, which aren't any worse, right? So that's a whole other sermon right there. I mean, in a lot of ways, Christians can be known for, sorry if this is offensive, but as like sexual buzzkills. We're like anti-sex. And so I just want to be so clear this morning and say the opposite. No. Christians, God in the scriptures thinks sex is so good, so beautiful, erotic, so powerful. And if you don't believe me, there's a whole book in the Old Testament called the Song of Songs, which I would argue, I think very strongly, is literally a genre of Jewish erotic poetry. Literally. And if that interests you, make sure you're here in the fall because we are doing a sermon series through the Song of Songs. There's something over here, you know what I mean? That's good. So Christians should be known, the church should be known, because Jesus believes that sex is good, passionate, and powerful because God created it. He created man and woman. He created to be together. So let's get rid of this notion that we should be anti-sex. It's a bunch of baloney. Now, because sex is so good and so powerful, God has said, hey, the only container that can hold it is a lifelong marriage between a man and a woman. Because it is so good, because it is so powerful, if you experience things outside of that, you're going to run into some problems. You know why? Because a covenant marriage is the only thing strong enough to hold the power of sex. So there's that. So what happens? Here's my question. What happens when our culture has made sex casual, when they've taken it out of the container of marriage? Well, I'll tell you what's happened. Here's a couple stats. These come from a website called Covenant Eyes. We'll put these on the screen. 51% of male students and 32% of female students viewed porn before their teenage years. 57% of teens search out porn at least monthly. Got to remember, a teenager starts around the age of 12, 13. And in case you think this is just a youth problem, 64% of Christian men and 5% of Christian women say they watch porn at least once a month. That's Christian men and women. So they're not even surveying people outside of the church. So let me ask you this. Are the words of Jesus relevant at all? Oh, you betcha. I think they're more relevant than ever. See, this isn't just a youth issue. This is an adult problem. And let me say this isn't just a male inclination. This is a female desire too. The rise of females watching and participating in pornography have increased dramatically in the last decade. And this isn't just on digital screens. This affects real, physical relationships. In the first century world of Jesus, all they were really focused on was the seventh commandment. What was the seventh commandment? It was do not commit adultery. And I think many of us in the church today, I think we do the same thing. And the thought is this. Well, as long as I don't have sexual relations outside of my marriage, I'm good to go. Right? I've obeyed. I've kept the commandment. I haven't committed adultery. But Jesus takes us so much deeper. Jesus gets to the heart on this topic. Because you may be able to avoid physical adultery in 2021, but at the same time that you're not physically committing adultery, you can still be addicted to porn or have an emotional affair. Emotional affairs, pornography, divorce, whatever in the category of sexual immorality, none of those things happen overnight. It's not like someone wakes up in the morning randomly and is like, oh, you know what? I'm going to hop on Tinder today. That's not the way those things go down. It takes months, years, decades for something to be bubbling up within that eventually works itself out as an affair. Those things never happen just overnight. There is a much longer and deeper story to someone in that state, and that's a whole other discussion. But what I want to do say, Jesus says here, is you know what that often starts with? Is lust. Lust is that intentional stare where you are in your imagination uncovering dreams and fantasies. That's why Jesus, verse 27 through 28, let me reread these. He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. See, Jesus here is the ultimate doctor, right? We call Jesus the great physician. And he says that adultery, check this out, is just a symptom. Adultery is just a symptom. It is not the underlying disease. The real disease is adultery of the heart. It's adultery of the heart. That's where it starts. Now remember, and this is where things have to get nuanced. All of us, part of what it means to be human is to be sexual. And we have natural, God-given sexual desires. I think sometimes people hear confused stuff. If you're walking out at a Starbucks or whatever, if you're male or female, and you see someone and you're like, wow, that person's really attractive. At least upon first glance, that's not lust. Right? God created good things. God created beauty. He created humans to be physically beautiful. That's from his hand. There's nothing wrong with that. Attraction and recognizing someone's beauty, there is nothing wrong with that. Here is the issue, though, and here's where lust comes in. It's in when you're in that situation and someone walks by and you see their beauty and you enter deeper into that with your mind and your heart. And you begin to play out that desire, right, with thoughts and images, and you guys get what I'm saying. Lust is you taking your imagination with dreams and fantasies and uncovering that person. Because here's what's interesting. If it was wrong to be at a Starbucks and just to see someone's beauty, to recognize it, if that was wrong, if that was sinful, then what Jesus says next here doesn't even apply. Here's what he says next. Verse 29, verse 30. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So this morning, what we're going to be doing is, instead of our prayer stations, we actually have machetes up here. Don't you guys take the Bible literally? I hear people all the time, well, we need to take the Bible literally. Yes, absolutely. But there's something called rhetorical exaggeration where Jesus is making a point. Jesus is not advocating self-mutilation here. And here's the point. This is what I was getting at. You could be blind, or you could cut off your right arm, and you could still lust. You see what I'm saying? That's not his point here. You could be blind. There was an early church father, Google this, who took this passage that way, and I'll just say that he made himself a eunuch. He still struggled with lust. Here's what Jesus is getting at. Run. Flee. Head the other way. Do everything you can. Be so intentional to just get away from all things sexual immorality. That's why the Apostle Paul, in one of his letters to the early church, literally uses the phrase run, flee. Like when he's saying flee, it's like you're heading this way, turn around and just jolt that way. Why? Because it's adultery of the heart, and you don't play with fire. It will get you. It will catch up to you. This is a powerful and explosive topic. Don't play around with it, is what he's saying. Is just run. So if your eye causes you to stumble, get it out. If your arm, cut it off. Meaning, do whatever it takes to get away from this. I mean, this just makes me think on the news. I mean, I'm sure everyone saw this in LA, right? Where they got the illegal fireworks and LAPD had them and they went to blow them up and it blew up on them. Don't play with stuff. Don't play with lust. It will blow up on you. It's interesting, Jesus uses the word hell here. I mean, he gets serious. Toss out the word hell flippantly. The word hell here, it means Gehenna. Gehenna was right outside of Jerusalem. You want to know what Gehenna was? It was a trash dump. It's where they took dead animal carcasses and dogs would chew on them. And there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. They put dead criminal bodies out in Gehenna. They would burn trash. And there would just be smoke filling the air. That's why it was commonly used as a metaphor for hell. Jesus is saying, lust, adultery, and certain cases of divorce can lead you into experiencing Gehenna here on earth if you're not careful. I think put in modern phrase, if you're not careful, it'll turn your relationships into garbage. And this is why Jesus is so good, because Jesus actually has your good in mind. Jesus has your good in mind. He brings good news. And so maybe you're thinking, Mark, I don't think lust. You're overhyping this. Lust can't bring hell on earth. It's a little thing. I got it under control. Let me read 2 quotes for you. These are 2 real quotes. The first comes from a doctor on Covenant Eyes, the website that I pulled the stats from. I hope these are sobering. The young woman who talked to me on campuses, presumably she's talking about college students, about the effect of pornography on their intimate lives, speak of feeling that they can never measure up. They can never ask for what they want. And that if they do not offer what porn offers, they cannot expect to hold a guy. The young men talk about it like what it's like to grow up learning about sex from porn. And how it's not helpful to them in trying to figure out how to be with a real woman. For the first time in human history, the image's power and allure have supplanted that of real naked women. Today, real naked women are just bad porn. And this one's a little bit more explicit. This is why it's a PG R-rated sermon. Mary Ann Layden, she's a doctor and author from UPenn, says this. I've also seen in my clinical experience that pornography damages the sexual performance of the viewers. Pornography viewers tend to have problems with premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction. Having spent so much time in unnatural sexual experiences with paper, celluloid, and cyberspace, they seem to find it difficult to have sex with a real human being. Pornography is raising their expectation and demand for types and amounts of sexual experiences, and at the same time, it's reducing their ability to experience sex. How sad is that? Do you see the damage that lust does? Lust, in this case pornography, and it's not limited to just pornography, will actually ruin and mess up your sex life. Jesus was right all along. And we think Jesus is repressive with sexuality. I think our culture is actually repressive. I heard someone say, a person that I look up to, the problem with porn is that it's not sexual enough. It's fake. It's not the real thing. That should change the way that we view lust. And I think Jesus' words make all the sense in the world now. So let me ask you this. Are you doing whatever it takes to run away from lust? And I'm talking male and female here. This is not just a male thing. I think sometimes males get a bad rap for that in the church. It's not just males. Are you doing whatever it takes to run away from lust? Don't play with fire. And so honestly, real practical, maybe you need to get off Instagram. Maybe you need to put accountability software on your devices. That's actually what Covenant Eyes is. They're an accountability software. Maybe you need to be in a group that checks in on you, honestly, where you can actually confess your sin. That's a good thing. There is healing and freedom when you confess. You cannot experience healing until you come out of hiding. Shame wants to keep you in a closet. Always open the door. Now, part 2 of this passage. That's just part 1. Part 2, verses 31 through 32. Jesus, he continues this discussion of lust and adultery, and he takes it to its ultimate consequence, divorce. And we have to take this passage, we have to understand what's going on here. Jesus is entering a debate amongst 2 rabbinic schools at that time. And these 2 rabbinic schools took opposite sides on how to understand a particular verse in the Bible. And that particular verse is Deuteronomy 24:1. Deuteronomy 24:1. These 2 rabbinic schools, they argued over how to interpret this. Here's the verse. If a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him, and here's the key phrase, they debated over this, because he finds something indecent about her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her, and sends her from his house. Here's what happened. You had the rabbinic school of Hillel. These are first century rabbis. Hillel took this phrase, find something indecent about her, and they ran with it, meaning they plugged in their own definition of indecency such that if they didn't like their wife's cooking, if they didn't like the way that she was dressed, whatever it was, that's considered indecent, and so now I have grounds to divorce her. My, yeah. You just wait, we're getting to that part. That, Hillel, check this out, that was the most common interpretation of Deuteronomy 24:1 in the first century world of Jesus. Was a very liberal, permissive interpretation. The other school, the rabbinic school of Shammai was very conservative, and they took the phrase indecency, and they said the only thing that refers to is sexual immorality. So the only reason for a guy in that culture who's on legal grounds to divorce his wife is if she commits sexual immorality. Those are the 2 schools of thought in Jesus' first century world. And shockingly, you know what Jesus does? He comes out on this side, but actually more conservative. Jesus sides with Shammai. He says this, verse 31. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Basically, here's what Jesus is saying. Outside of issues of sexual immorality, if you divorce someone, you're committing adultery. Or if you marry someone who's who's been divorced, you're committing adultery. Now, I'm going to come back to this, so hang with me here. Here's the overall point that I want to make, though. The first century world of Jesus was a very casual, permissive, relaxed divorce culture because everyone sided with Hillel. So Jesus here, he comes out swinging, and he's saying, how dare you, men? How dare you divorce your wife if she makes food that you don't like, if you don't like the way that she dresses, if you just wake up in the morning and you're like, I don't like her anymore. He says, you've committed adultery. Shame on you. All you Hillel people, you're wrong. So Jesus attacks a very casual, permissive, relaxed marriage divorce culture in the first century world. That is the point. Now, take this today. They say the divorce rate is between 40 to 50% of married adults. So, is it just lust that we're permissive, casual, and relaxed with? No. We're just as permissive and casual with our marriages as the first century world that Jesus lived in. I thought of this. I've been into shoes lately, and I know some of you got hundreds of shoes in your closet. Our culture treats our marriages like we do a pair of shoes. Once they're a little messy, once they're worn down, get a little dirty, once they don't fit like they used to, we abandon them and go buy another pair online. I think that's how we treat our marriages. A little messy, a little dirty, don't fit like they used to. I can go get another pair. Now, divorce, from a Christian perspective, is very complicated and nuanced. It is impossible for me, in the remaining 5 or 7 minutes that I have, to talk about every category, every scenario. Jesus just spends 2 verses on it, okay, in Matthew 5. And so I want to be so sensitive, so compassionate, so graceful with this topic. Because the reality is, statistically, 40 to 50% of people in this room have dealt with divorce. So I want to say 4 things. 4 things to maybe bring some clarity to this. Here's the first one. God hates divorce. It breaks his heart. God's original and design is for one man, one woman, together for life. Okay? Secondly, however, because of sin, we live in a very broken world. There are examples and situations in Scripture where one is allowed to divorce if reconciliation is not possible. Let me give a couple examples. Jesus gives one in here, sexual immorality. The Apostle Paul gives another one, abandonment. If your spouse leaves you. I think we can theologically, and now I'm entering into Mark personal subjective view. I think one can include in that physical abuse, emotional abuse. I think permission for divorce, what it gets at, and the reason why there are exceptions is because whatever disrupts the one flesh union, because marriage at its core is a one flesh union. And so whatever divorces that one flesh union, whether it's sexual sin, emotional abuse, physical abuse, right? Abandonment. If someone leaves a spouse, they're literally physically leaving that flesh union. There are exceptions and circumstances for that. We see that in the scriptures. That is important to point out. Thirdly, this is just as important. Divorce is not the unpardonable sin. I think a lot of us need to hear that this morning. There is absolute, free, and abundant grace, healing, freedom, and forgiveness for anyone who's been a part of any type of divorce. And I want you to know that this morning. We want to offer grace and healing and freedom for forgiveness in other areas. We need to do just the same thing in this area. You can't pick and choose grace. Jesus doesn't pick and choose, he just releases grace. Divorce is not the unpardonable sin. Fourthly, I think because of high divorce rates in the church, we pretty much mirror our culture. I think there is an element where we have lost our witness to our watching secular world. There's some healing that needs to happen. Now, maybe you're here and you're like, what in the world? Why is divorce? Why is this such a big deal to Jesus? Like, this seems random. Like, what's going on here? Theologian Dr. Beth Felker-Jones writes this. I think she puts it far better than I could. Marriage, created by God as a one-flesh union, is meant to be a sign of God's unbreakable covenant with us. This is an important symbol throughout the scriptures. God is compared to a husband and God's people to a wife. When, by the grace of God, we're able to keep a marriage together, we get to be symbols, imperfect symbols, but still symbols, of God's faithfulness to his people. Marriages are supposed to last because they're symbols of God's lasting love for us. That's why God hates divorce. Because marriage is a picture, it's a symbol of his love for us. I think the call for us this morning from the words of Jesus is this: do everything you can to guard your heart from lust. Do everything you can. Single or married, male or female, young or old. And let me say this. I have known people in their elderly years who have struggled with this. It ain't just a young, if you're in your 20s and your 30s and all your dopamine and vasopressin, which are chemicals in your brain. No, those things are still going in your elderly years too. We have confused lust for love. Often, I say this all the time, I say it so flippantly, I love you. I love tacos. I mean, we use that phrase so flippantly. I think when we say I love you, I think what we're really meaning is that, you make me feel good. You bring pleasure to me. I love you. Now, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. There's nothing wrong with desire. But we have to remember that lust and love are two different things. Lust and love are two different things. Jesus calls us to flee lust and to run into love. Flee lust, run towards love. Because if you don't, it'll trash your relationships. After months, years, decades, Gehenna will show up. Lust leads to trashing your relationships. That's Gehenna. Here's the good news. Here's what I want to end with. Jesus doesn't lust after you. He loves you. Jesus doesn't lust after you. He loves you. I think so many of us this morning need to hear that. There is healing and there is grace and there's forgiveness and there is freedom in this area of lust, of divorce. What a beautiful Sunday to celebrate communion together. Beautiful, beautiful opportunity. When Rachel and I were going through our premarital counseling, I remember this 6-7 years ago. I thought this was so stupid at the time. You know what Christian guys are like in premarital counseling? They're just like, dude, shut up, I just want to have sex. Anyways. I don't want to go any more off the script here. I'll probably find myself in trouble. He said, hey, 1 Corinthians 13, the famous love passage. I want you to meditate on that passage, but I want you to exchange the word love for sex. And read it. Sex is patient. Sex is kind. Sex doesn't envy. Sex doesn't boast. Now, I want you to, he didn't say this, I'm adding this now. What if we put the word lust into 1 Corinthians 13? Here's how it would read. Lust is not patient. Lust is not kind. Lust does envy. Lust does boast. Lust does dishonor others. Lust is self-seeking. Do you know the one who wants to change your life from a life of lust to a life of love? There's only one person that can remove the chains of sexual lust addiction, whether that's pornography, looking at another woman, envying a man's power and status, that's lust. Jesus can. Why? Because Jesus is the definition of love. Jesus offers the most true, committed love that you'll ever experience in your life. And guess what? Jesus' love for you is anything but casual. You want legit love that lasts, that's committed to you in good times or bad? Come get to know the prophet from Nazareth who hung on that for you. If you're here this morning, there's no pressure to take communion if you don't know this Jesus yet. There's no judgment. I want to encourage you to take this from underneath your seat. The first little tab will get you to the wafer, the second to the cup. And here's what I want to do, a little bit different. I want to read 1 Corinthians 13 over us as we prepare to take the elements. And using what my premarital counselor did, I want to plug in the name Jesus every time we read the word love. And so as we think about the bread, which represents Jesus' body sacrificed for us, the cup, which represents his blood poured out for us, it's this Jesus who offers us a life free from lust and full of love. Hear these words. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus does not envy. He doesn't boast. He's not proud. Jesus does not dishonor others. Jesus is not self-seeking. Jesus isn't easily angered. Jesus keeps no record of wrongs. Jesus doesn't delight in evil, but he rejoices with the truth. Jesus always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. That is good news this morning, wherever you are in this topic. Let us eat and drink together. So here's what I want to do. The band's going to lead us in 2 songs. Have our prayer station. There won't be machetes. I know. I just know this statistically. I don't know everyone's heart and mind in here, obviously. But I would think most of us struggle with this topic in some shape or form. You will never experience freedom until you come out of hiding. Shame grows in the greenhouse of an enclosed closet. These stations, pastors, shepherding elders will be here, safe people, people you can trust. We just want to pray for freedom, for forgiveness, for healing. It doesn't matter who comes up. Guys, there's no judgment in here. Let's be a church that aims and runs towards freedom, forgiveness, and release, rather than worried what someone's struggling with. And I'd say this, if anyone here has a perfect marriage, come find me after the service. I'd love to know your secrets. If anyone here doesn't struggle with lust, please let me know the secret. So let me just normalize this discussion. You can come up here for prayer as like to be proactive over your marriage. So if you come up here, it doesn't mean, oh my gosh, that person's dealing with porn. Oh my gosh. Drop that. Jesus cares about healing and forgiveness. Can we pursue that? Please don't miss the chance to be prayed over. It's amazing. Let me pray for us and let's go into that. Holy Spirit, you are a God. 1 Corinthians 13 describes you. You are so patient with us. You want to rejoice in truth. You want to rejoice and remind us this morning who we are in you. We're not defined by what we have or haven't done. Single, married, divorced, male, female, young, old. We just want freedom in this place. The scriptures say, Jesus, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Come, Holy Spirit.